Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. As we welcome you once again to the airwaves of Salam Media, our listeners, our viewers on the various platforms of Salam Media. Wonderful you're able to join us on this Wednesday evening. And it is in conversation with myself, Inayat Wadi, where once again we are going to be unpacking a major issue in South Africa. It's been a major talking point. In fact, there have been a lot more questions and then answers regarding this particular matter, as we are going to be unpacking the Israeli agenda and the implications for South Africa as far as the Palestinian refugees are concerned. Now, when the story had actually broken last week, there was just so much to digest and so much to absorb. But again, it just raised so many questions, and this is the reason why we have assembled a panel this evening. Mazhar Khan, in fact, sent out a video clip earlier this morning where he spoke about some of the consequences for South Africa and how South Africa may be impacted as well. So Mazhar is a UK-based activist. Right on top of the story has been Al Jazeera and the South African correspondent for Al Jazeera, Fahmida Miller. She's also an international correspondent as well. So she's with us this evening. And also the man in the thick of things has been none other than Khalid Vawda, the founder of Social Intifada. And as we wait for our guests to appear on screen, Mazhar Khan, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Welcome to you.
Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullah.
And Fahmida, to you as well. Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum salam. Thank you for the invitation.
You're welcome. You're most welcome. Khalid, Assalamu alaikum as always. I know we spoke on Sunday that, we will be having you on air for this Wednesday. So Jazakallah for your time as well.
Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullah. Jazakallah khair for having us.
Yes, Khalid, I'd actually like to begin with you. And as I mentioned, you've been in the thick of things since the story had actually broken out, what had taken place at Our Tambo International Airport with the plane. And obviously since then, a lot has been playing out in the background. And let's just try and understand, what has happened since. I know some of the information is possibly sensitive in terms of the whereabouts of the refugees, all of that at this point in time. But a lot of work, a lot of effort has gone in coordinating the entire crisis, for want of a better term.
So a lot has happened, obviously, since Thursday, and the global outcry and the global eyes on the situation is justified, and it's actually needed. Thursday, we had an arrival of a flight from Nairobi in South Africa, in Johannesburg, which activists were waiting for, and Palestinians, some of them who live in South Africa, were actually waiting for, because they were expecting relatives or family members or friends on that particular flight. When this flight landed at 8 o'clock in the morning, the Border Management Authority at OR Tambo International actually grounded the plane and didn't allow any of the passengers to get off. There were 153 Palestinian nationals from Gaza who were on the flight. The Border Management Authority at OR Tambo International said that none of them had an exit stamp in their passports at the point of destination. So according to immigration law, that was the reason for not allowing them to disembark. The passengers stayed on the plane for about 12 hours. There was intervention by human rights activists, by groups who did work on the ground, excellent sterling work from the Caring Women's Forum, from Lawyers for Human Rights, Nigel Branken doing excellent work, Naeem Jinnah stepped in. Lots of people started calling around and trying to assist. And eventually government got involved, and it went up to Ronald Lamola and President Cyril Ramaphosa, who then intervened and said that the Department of Home Affairs should allow the 153 passengers safe entry into South Africa. There's just one clarification here, because there has been some disinformation circulating in the mass media about this. Every single Palestinian who was on that flight had valid travel documents. Everybody has a valid Palestinian passport. The disinformation that's being spread is that they don't have legal documents, they're illegal immigrants, etc., etc. This feeds into a strong wave of xenophobia in South Africa, and we need to be very wary about the type of language that we put out. These people are all have proper documentation. The only issue was they don't have an exit stamp from occupied Palestine, and we can go into the mechanics of that in a short while. But this was not the first flight. There was a flight on the 28th of October which brought more than 150 Palestinians here as well. That particular flight, and there's question marks that arise here, and the Al Jazeera team has been excellent in doing work on this. Those passengers on that flight also didn't have exit stamps in their passports, yet they were processed through immigration at OR Tambo without any questions. In fact, the lawyers had to go and locate the families in the various parts of Johannesburg. So there's a lot of question marks, and I'm sure we can unpack some of those.
Yes, Jazakallah for that, Khalid. Fahmida, let's bring you into the discussion. And as Khalid mentioned, Al Jazeera has been doing a lot of work, and I'm sure, you personally as well, you've had a lot to digest since the story had actually broken out since last Thursday. And since then, we've seen a number of reports coming through, even through Al Jazeera, in terms of exposés and in terms of, the suspicious group, the Al-Majd group as well. A lot that Al Jazeera has been doing. Let's just try and understand what you've been able to unpack until now, Fahmida.
Well, I think a lot of attention has been paid to exactly who Al-Majd Europe is. It's been described as a shadowy organization, some sort of entity that has been facilitating the movement of Palestinians from Gaza. And one of the key questions around that, though, is exactly who is behind this organization, because I think a lot of concern was raised when, as Khalid mentioned, the first group of Palestinians who arrived on the 28th of October, and they were found in parts of Johannesburg. Essentially, it would appear as if they were dumped in South Africa, promised a certain amount of time in terms of their accommodation and support in South Africa. That, of course, didn't happen, and they were essentially left stranded. And that's when civil society and NGO, those sort of groups, were then in contact with them. And that's where I think many members of various communities then understood that there were a group of Palestinians in South Africa with no assistance whatsoever, with no accommodation, no food, clothes, various issues that had to be dealt with. And I think this is when the story essentially came to light in terms of why is this happening, who is behind it. Now, Al-Majd Europe is an organization that, even though describes being established actually unregistered, and we've heard this also from the Palestinian embassy, where it appears to be an unregistered organization. Various media outlets have done further work around examining exactly who they are. Now, one thing that has also come to light is what has emerged is somebody by the name of Tomer Lind, or also known as Tom Lind, an Israeli Estonian, who himself has said on platforms like LinkedIn that he is assisting, responsible for the evacuation of Palestinians from Gaza. But also what has come out is a website where, for those who have registered on the link that they've been sent, and we also have to point out that there are people who have willingly chosen to leave Gaza. They've paid thousands of dollars for that. But even then, it's important to note, and this came from one of the Palestinian gentlemen that we spoke to, that because of the war, they're forced to leave. And again, this question of human trafficking comes up. How do they leave? Where are they going? Who is facilitating it? And we go back to Al-Majd Europe. Now, one of the documents it seems that they've been made to sign is a waiver where they relinquish their rights of return. And as Khalid mentioned, we go back to the lack of an exit stamp on their valid passports. This would again lend to the issue of being unable to return to Gaza, and who is behind that.
Yes, Fahmida. Mazhar, let's just, I know you've put out that video clip this morning, and I found it quite interesting because this is where, Khalid speaks about xenophobia as well. And you raise this question in this video clip where you speak about East South Africa turning against Palestine. And just to unpack, what you tried to actually convey in this video clip that you had put out.
Ji, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. The Zionists, it's very obvious they've lost control of the narrative. And it's very strange for them that the world is turning against them. So when you've got something like 13 Congress people in America, which are openly and publicly refusing to have association with AIPAC, when you've got, as I mentioned in the video clip, Mamdani winning an election in a staunchly pro-Israeli constituency normally. So that is an indication of how much the opinion globally has shifted. So it seems to me that they've given up on trying to argue their lies and propaganda and trying to convince people of that. So instead, what they've done is they are trying to cause fitna, chaos amongst these people that oppose them. So the deflection turns away from the Zionists and their genocide and occupation and becomes an internal dispute with the people. Now, they've done exactly the same here in England, and it's very transparent. So in Britain, we've got like our own extremists, right-wing extremists, like so-called Tommy Robinson and other people as well, like Paul Golding and others. The Israelis are actually funding these people, financing them. And this is very clear. This is not even hidden, because other members of the right-wing fraternity have openly said that they were approached by the Israelis, the Zionists, for funding if they only attack Islam and Muslims and don't attack the Israelis. So some of the right-wingers didn't accept that money. Tommy Robinson obviously has done. So it seems that it's their strategy now is to cause division amongst the opposition to Zionism. So Britain, we've had millions of people turning up to the marches. So they're feeding into this xenophobia, stroke Islamophobia, stroke racism to create divisions among the people. And it seems they're doing the same thing in South Africa, because South Africa is also globally seen as one of the few countries at an international level, at a state level, which is using their international spokespeople to oppose Zionism. So the case that was taken to ICJ is seen by many as a great step for Palestinians. And because of that, South Africa has a very good impression and a status in the eyes of other people. So to me, it seems that they have done this deliberately to dump Palestinians there, to cause a problem, an internal problem amongst the South Africans. So they themselves become consumed in their own issues to deflect the criticism away from the Zionists themselves.
Yes, Mazhar, shukran for that. Khalid, I think just to follow up from what Mazhar is saying and talking about the xenophobia and the internal problem. Now, we've seen a number of reports come through. We've seen a number of responses as well, where certain people have been targeted, individuals have been targeted, organizations have been targeted, like Gift of the Givers as well. And we are finding that, questions are being raised with regards to the support that the refugees are getting in South Africa. And it is creating that division that Mazhar actually speaks about, where on the other hand, when one just sees the hypocrisy, where we have those that have been serving in the IDF, no one has questioned, particularly from those quarters, we haven't seen any of those questions being raised. And here you have refugees that have come through basically with just clothing on their back, and they are being supported, and we see this outcry.
Important point, and I just want to walk it back one step, and touching on what Fahmida has mentioned. So there's two elements to what's transpired here. The one is that the Palestinians, although some of them have left voluntarily, and I'll use the word in inverted commas, they were forced to do that because Israel has decimated Gaza into oblivion. It's an apocalyptic scene in Gaza, and people cannot live. It's unlivable. This was by design, and it was intentional from the barbaric Israeli regime from the onset. They told the world they're going to do this, and they ended up doing exactly that. Now, since last year, since 2024, and we broke the story on Al-Majd after the first arrival of refugees on the 28th of October, Al-Majd were advertising in Gaza to Palestinians on various social media platforms, Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, in Arabic, about this opportunity to leave Gaza. We know in terms of exiting Gaza, Palestinians are only allowed to leave through Rafah. Rafah has been closed, and anybody leaving Rafah or entering through Rafah has to submit their names to Egypt, which then submits the names to Israel, which then decides to either approve or decline those applications. All of these Palestinians were taken through the Kerem Shalom crossing, which is closely guarded by the Israeli military. They were taken to the Ramon International Airport or the military base, and they were transported on a Romanian chartered airline, a private airline, to Nairobi. So all of this speaks to the work that Al Jazeera have done in uncovering who Al-Majd is, who's behind Al-Majd. They make no bones about this. They're working very closely with the Israeli occupation forces. They're working closely with the Israeli government, and it mirrors the Israeli government's narrative since last year, where they're saying, because obviously ethnic cleansing is too strong a term for them in the eyes of the world, we would allow people to leave if they wanted to, and we wouldn't stand in their way, hence voluntary migration, because it sounds quite easy and quite soft. On the point of the situation in South Africa, this was also calculated, and I think that's one of the reasons why South Africa was chosen. South Africa has one of the best and most welcoming options for people seeking asylum anywhere in the world. The Bill of Rights and the Constitution open their doors to South Africa for anybody who's fleeing persecution anywhere in the world and they wish to seek asylum. So by law, if anybody declares that they want to seek asylum when they reach South Africa, irrespective of how they've reached South Africa, the authorities have to listen to that appeal. So this is another question mark on the manner in which the Border Management Authority conducted themselves until obviously the government stepped in. But there was a specific intention, especially with the onset of the G20 taking place this week. We believe that this was by intention to want to embarrass South Africa. As Mazhar pointed, South Africa has a standing on the international stage for leading the charge at the ICJ against Israel. Nobody's done this before. And South Africa's ties with the Palestinian struggle for liberation go on for decades, and they will never end until Palestine is free. So the Zionist lobby within South Africa, outside of South Africa, the Israelis, were looking at devious ways in which to try and discredit the South African government. And by those videos going viral on Thursday, as they did, some of them achieved exactly that.
Yes, Khalid. And also, Fahmida, I think just looking at it from the Al Jazeera perspective and just looking at it, and what I actually saw quite an interesting interview with Nida Ibrahim, one of the correspondents at Al Jazeera, where she spoke about an old version of Al-Majd. And she spoke about strong evidence, where they found strong evidence linking this to ethnic cleansing. And we know as far back as February 2025, these calls for ethnic cleansing were being made by the Israeli government, by Netanyahu, the likes of Smotrich, Ben Gvir, all of them. And already there was a document that spelled out the terms of what they called, as Khalid says, a soft term, voluntary migration or evacuation. And we know that this is ethnic cleansing. So just, from an Al Jazeera perspective, this that has been uncovered, clearly we know that Israel obviously denies, and they will deny this, but the evidence speaks for itself.
Well, I think the evidence is important to look at specifically because of what Israel is being accused of: ethnic cleansing, the forced movement of people from Gaza. And this situation has raised a number of questions, more questions at this point that many of us have answers to. But one thing that Khalid pointed out also was essentially how the Israeli government would have to cooperate at the very least and facilitate the movement of people from Gaza out from Gaza through to the Ramon airport, to Nairobi, and onto South Africa. Now, in terms of the evidence, we've spoken to Global Aviation, and that is the company that arranged for the charter for that flight from Nairobi airport, from Jomo Kenyatta to OR Tambo. And as far as we can trace it, I'm just going to look at, some of the questions we've had answered in the last day or two. They've said that they were contracted by Kibris Turkish Airline International, which brokers charters, to provide an aircraft and crew to then fly people from Nairobi to South Africa. So, of course, this journey broken up into two parts. In Nairobi, the 153 people at least would have left that plane, moved to a second plane. In Nairobi, they spent about 2 hours. They wouldn't have needed any sort of visa because they would have been in transit. And what is important in terms of this ethnic cleansing, in terms of this movement of people, if you look at some of the countries mentioned, including Indonesia, Malaysia, India, South Africa, And remember, this goes back to the people on the planes not knowing where they were going until the last couple of hours. In the case of Thursday's flight, they only knew where they were going after they boarded in Nairobi and were on the second flight. And in the announcement made by Global Aviation, did they understand that they were going to South Africa? The people we've spoken to have said prior to that, they believed they were going to Indonesia, to Malaysia. We've seen documents where somebody was promised accommodation in India. In fact, we've tried to follow up on some of that documentation from this travel agent that has a UK-based number, can't get through to that number. The emails that we have sent have bounced back. So to answer your question, trying to connect the dots based on the information and the evidence that is at hand is important in terms of framing this adequately, because the issue of misinformation, and also, again, if we look at what Israel has said in the last week, that South Africa has embarrassed itself, that they have supported they have pushed for the case at the ICJ, and that's the kind of rhetoric you'll see come out. Well, South Africa should, of course, accept them because this is what they want. But in fact, it's not what South Africa wants. And that's where we're seeing the government at this point, between a rock and a hard place. We know South Africa is vocal about its support for Palestine and it is anti-Zionist agenda, and ultimately is supporting a humanitarian position in all of this. For South Africa to willingly accept plane loads of Palestinians over and over again would be going contrary to its stance that there should be a state of Palestine, that people there have the right to their territory. So that is the difficulty South Africa is facing. And if they were to move, and this is what we've heard from Ronald Lamola, the Minister of International Relations and Cooperation, South Africa will not accept any more people from Palestine, not because they don't understand the humanitarian situation, but because they have a very strong stance in terms of the right to Palestine for people in that territory, and that to assist with their removal from there will be going contrary to the right to a free Palestine.
Yes, Fahmida. Mazhar, I just like your comment in terms of what Fahmida has actually said in terms of their right to Palestine. And, the whole agenda behind embarrassing South Africa is just one issue. But also looking at the Palestinians in terms of where they are at this point in time, because the picture that is being painted is there are thousands of Palestinians that are actually dying to leave Gaza. And this is the narrative that Israel is actually pushing to justify what has actually played out last week.
You know, they're saying the Palestinians are dying to get out of Gaza. They're even more dying for the Zionists to get out of Gaza and the whole of Palestine. The Yahud, honestly, they need to get a gold medal for the way they like to reframe arguments, rewrite history, and throw the cat amongst the pigeon and get people debating all sorts of stuff. So their argument is very cleverly, oh, look, South Africa is not accepting refugees. It's a refugee problem. And these people are voluntarily trying to ethnically cleanse themselves. The point is, if you've had a genocide, you are not, like Khalid already said, you are not willingly leaving there. You're trying to save your life. This is a desperate situation. So this is not the debate. And we should reframe the debate and say, this is not about refugees seeking an asylum. It is about an illegal occupation going all the way back to the 1940s that is causing this. And the only people that should be refugees looking for a new home is the illegal occupiers in Palestine. And the debate should be, should South Africa accept the illegal Zionist colonizers in Palestine to come to South Africa? That would be an honest debate to have. That, should America, should Australia, should Iceland, maybe the South Pole, will they accept the genocidal maniacs from who are occupying Palestine to be housed there? So those are the refugees that we should be talking about. We should not be talking about a people who have been forcibly expelled. I don't accept it that they are voluntarily left. Nobody, it is your human nature, nobody likes to leave their home, doesn't matter how bad it is, or their homeland, unless it is a desperate situation. And so it's we should be very careful that when we engage in debate and discussion. We shouldn't allow it to be reframed so we're on the back foot and they controlling the narrative. We should not accept the premise. We should not accept the framing of the argument. This is not an argument about the refugees being accepted or not accepted. It's about genocide. It's about occupation, and it's about how we're going to fix that problem.
Yes, Mazhar. And also, I think, Khalid, as Mazhar speaks about them wanting to control the narrative, and let's just look at it from a Palestinian perspective and the pro-Palestinian, whether we talk of solidarity movements, organizations, even if we look at media in South Africa as well, mainstream media as well. What sort of narrative is playing out, Khalid?
This is something very important, and the public needs to be on full alert, and the public needs to be more diligent in the way they seek out information and the types of information they engage, because what Mazhar pointed out is exactly true. There is a narrative being pushed by Zionist circles, number one, to embarrass South Africa, and number two, to deflect away from the genocide and the occupation. So if we get caught, on arguments about the refugees, we need to know, obviously, the incidents and how they took place and the timeframes and all of that, because there's a legal case to be pursued, and there's a case to be made about human trafficking as well, which we can talk about. But it's important that we don't lose sight of the bigger picture. Palestinians didn't want to leave Gaza. Those we spoke to, I spoke to a few personally from the flight on Thursday and some from the first flight. You could tell by looking at their faces, they didn't want to leave Gaza. I spoke to a young dentist who showed me his 1-year-old son. He's caught in two minds because he wants a future for his child, but his parents are still in Gaza. And he couldn't afford to get everybody out. So nobody wants to leave their homes. There's a lot of people in Gaza who will stay in Gaza, and they're prepared to go the full distance and attain Shahada if needs be. Others, and this is a human right, choose, and if they can manage to afford to try and make a life elsewhere temporarily until they can go back to Gaza. Every single Palestinian in the diaspora, not just from this genocide, but for the last 80 years, everybody wants to go back to Palestine. And the right of return is something that is being denied. This is something that we need to always circle back to. Every single Palestinian has a right to return to their land. Why is it that Israel allows Jews to be born anywhere in the world, automatic citizenship to occupy Palestine, whereas Palestinians who've been born on the land are expelled and don't have a chance to return to their land? So we absolutely need to keep the bigger picture in mind when we are engaging some of these accounts and some of these media outlets who are spreading this information.
Yes, Khalid. Also, Fahmida, Khalid spoke about human trafficking, and I know Al Jazeera has reported on this matter as well. There have been a number of concerns that were raised with human trafficking. Just your take, on this particular aspect?
I think what is key to remember around why this is being described as human trafficking is because we're also looking at the extent to which vulnerable people are being exploited. And again, the link to, or not the link, but rather the lack of a right to return. It would appear that this is not about a temporary respite from the war while Gaza is being rebuilt. It looks as if it is directly linked to ridding Gaza of its people, and that they aren't able to return. And this appears to be part of an operation to do that by removing those rights, removing those sort of liabilities. Many of the people that we have spoken to have also spoken about the lack of clarity about where they're going and what kind of support they'll receive there, or in fact promises made around being taken to a safe place, and that changing constantly. And also if we look at the various different operators involved in this and how it doesn't lead back to there isn't a clear indication of who is behind it in terms of the shadiness of all of this, raises a number of questions. Certainly, this organization, Al-Majd Europe, or anybody that we've associated with it so far, this is not about humanitarian evacuation. This is about the permanent removal of people to destinations that they've picked based on those places, not where Palestinians don't need visas. So essentially a dumping ground. And just because people have paid for this travel doesn't legitimize, I suppose, any claims of voluntary migration. And so
Yes,
I think this
Fahmida.
is why it goes back, of course, to this issue of human trafficking.
Inayat,
Yes.
if you don't mind, if I'd just like to jump in on one thing, just to add on the excellent points Fahmida has made. A lot of people are under the impression that because this is being paid for by them, by the Palestinians, it's something done willingly. But Israel has created the conditions to force people out. And then Israel sits back, and they're excellent at doing this, as Mazhar's pointed out. They're very good at doing this. Is creating terminology around it so that we get caught among, the nitty-gritty of the arguments. The fact is they've decimated Gaza. It's apocalyptic. People who can afford to, some of them would like to leave because they can't live there. On the other side, you've got 15,000 to 16,000 Palestinians who are awaiting medical evacuation for severe cases, which obviously cannot be treated in Gaza because the hospitals are dysfunctional. They haven't been granted permission to leave, to go to Egypt. Yet people who've paid these ridiculous amounts of money, between 2,000 to 3,000 to 4,000 US dollars per person and per baby, have been shunted out very quickly. I just want to quickly, we did some homework earlier on the human trafficking protocol. So the UN Palermo Protocol defines trafficking as involving the movement of people through deception, coercion, or abuse of vulnerability, leading to exploitation or abandonment. This is something very important, and I think if the viewers and the listeners can do a bit of homework on this. So this operation by Al-Majd checks almost every single box. There's deception about the destination. There are fees extracted from desperate families. There is abuse of vulnerability during genocide. There is direct state involvement through Israeli coordination. There's been no informed consent, and there's been a forced population removal. All of these match the indicators of the UN Palermo Protocol, which speaks about the indicators around human trafficking. So all of these are in place, but Israel's, again, trying to deflect away from this on the side of South Africa and by throwing other stories at people, which they then get caught up in.
Well, certainly, and I think, obviously they are masters, as you mentioned, and, Mazhar mentioned that they deserve a gold medal for deception. But Mazhar, I know you put out a piece as well with regard to, and I just want to revisit this with regard to Tom Lint, and how this actually deflects from the agenda and the true agenda that he's playing out as far as Israel is concerned.
Yeah, I mean, your esteemed guests probably know more about this than I do, but this guy Tom Lint, even if you go to the website, this Al-Majd website, it's very well put together. Yeah, it's not some guy in his bedroom who's put this together. Some professional people have got together and put this together. It looks very good, it looks very professional, but it is a facade. So when you look at the address and the contact details, none of that works. If you look at Sheikh Jarrah, I think it was Al Jazeera. They actually sent somebody there to the address with a camera to say, can you find the office? There's nothing there. There's nothing there. Even when you click on their website on that place, it's just a random place in Sheikh Jarrah. So this chap who's involved in this is a cover. He's liaising with the occupation forces, with the illegal occupation government, whom they call themselves the Israelis. So this is not just a one-man bandit. There is sophistication behind this, and there's collusion with state elements. And as Khalid said, that it ticks all the boxes of human trafficking, and that's what this is. It doesn't. You can put a lipstick on a pig; it's still a pig. You can put a nice website there and call it a charity. This is human trafficking. The government's involved, and this is a very serious matter. And I think that needs to be pursued and pushed. Not this argument about refugees, that this is a human trafficking, taking advantage of vulnerable people, and the ball needs to be pushed back into that court, and some people need to ask questions, because this is one way. As it's already been mentioned, this is a one-way journey out of Gaza to wherever else in the world. You are not coming back, and you are never coming back. And this is exactly what they said they're going to do, and this is what they are doing.
Yes, Mazhar. Khalid, just to get back to you, and I know one of the narratives that have been making the rounds has been, although we know these people have paid these exorbitant prices as well, but in terms of the actual charter of the flights and the UAE, I've heard the UAE, you mentioned of the UAE being made in terms of being at the forefront of chartering of flights. Have we managed to uncover anything with regard to the flights? And then South Africa also looking at Lift Airlines, for example.
So there hasn't been any concrete evidence of the UAE involvement in the flights. In the first report that we put out at the end of October, there was strong suspicion of UAE involvement in the Arabic interfaces that were used in the adverts on social media that were circulated in Gaza last year. And when you couple that with Mohammed Dahlan, the criminal from Palestine who now lives in the UAE and is close friends with the leadership in the UAE, his talk about the Gaza plan and the Gaza proposal, when you tie these two together, you have to start joining the dots and then looking for the evidence there. In terms of connecting it to the flights, there has been nothing concrete there, but there's strong links towards their involvement in the interface, in assisting the Israelis to put those adverts out. But even throughout, obviously, this genocide, there's been strong UAE involvement within Gaza. We know the UAE do not want any resistance forces there. The UAE are also lining up alongside some of the contracts that are about to be handed out for the alleged reconstruction of Gaza, which is going almost exclusively to Western and Gulf firms. The militant gangs who we were told, do you remember the narrative in the media that all the aid is being stolen by Hamas? All the aid is being stolen by Hamas. They're feeding it to the fighters. They're depriving the people of all of that. That's all a total lie. There were 4 major gangs, possibly 5, operating in Gaza, criminal gangs, drug dealing gangs, mercenaries, who were working closely with the Israelis, among them the Dugmush clan, the Yasser Abu Shabab group. These were the people who were responsible for the stealing of aid. These were the people who were responsible for giving information, vital security information out to the Israelis. And in the videos, in Al Jazeera's reporting in the Strip, almost all of their vehicles carry UAE registration plates. I don't know how more obvious it can be. There is very, very strong UAE involvement, just because a lot of people are under the false impression that the UAE has become this haven for the world, and it's all a bed of roses in the UAE. They are playing absolutely dirty games around the world, in different parts of the world, for minerals and for enriching themselves. So we see the genocide happening in Sudan. The rapid support forces are being funded by the UAE. The UAE has direct involvement, obviously, in Palestine. They have made agreements with Israel, which even contravene the United Nations. So the UN has listed a number of Israeli companies as being in direct contravention of the settlement building activity in the West Bank. UAE firms are still doing business with these firms. That's just one of the crimes of the UAE. The UAE has hosted Israeli leadership during the genocide. The UAE has opened its doors to genocide soldiers throughout the genocide when they needed a break from dismembering children and shooting kids in the head and dropping bombs on buildings. So the UAE has a deep, deep, deep record, which is quite dark and sinister, and people need to be aware of that.
Yes. Fahmida, I'm not too sure whether you've had the opportunity to engage with government, and if you have, what is government saying?
Well, at this point, I think one of the most vocal has been first President Cyril Ramaphosa, where he had described all of this as an attempt to flush people out of Gaza. And I think that kind of wording is also very important in terms of how the story is framed. South Africa's position specifically, especially as a recipient of some of these people from Gaza aboard these, as the president had said, very mysterious flight, describing the entire arrival as mysterious. And we've discussed many of the questions around it, but also the International Relations and Cooperation Minister. And where South Africa is, and I mentioned this a bit earlier, between a rock and a hard place, wanting to continue in a very humanitarian position, but at the same time, wanting to support the right for Palestine to exist. And so in that way, wanting to not encourage Palestinians to travel to South Africa, but also board these very strange flights where their fate is uncertain. Now, the Minister, Ronald Lamola, has also said that they will not accept any more flights or passengers from Gaza. We've also heard, in fact, we tried speaking to the Palestinian embassy, who at this point doesn't want to speak anymore on this matter, saying that it had issued a statement previously. And given what South Africa has said, they have nothing more to say on this matter because they also don't support what is being called a voluntary migration. We've dealt with that here. But South Africa says that it is going to continue with an investigation into how this is happening. Nothing more has come to light from officials, but we're hoping that something more will emerge in the coming days in terms of their official position and exactly how they're going to tackle this. Because also, if it's South Africa in the last couple of weeks, and it's South Africa going forward, because we also understand that maybe more flights. If it's South Africa now, it could also then be Indonesia, it could be Malaysia, it could be India, any country that doesn't require visas from Palestinians. If we go back to May, we understand that there is potentially a flight that was supposed to have traveled to Indonesia, and Indonesia then had difficulty in terms of its position and how to deal with that. So if this organized attempt to, as the president says, flush people out of Gaza, if they also know there's nowhere to take people, we could see perhaps this strategy falling away because they won't be readily accepted. And not because these countries don't care, but because there is a greater strategy at play in terms of keeping people in the land that they have the right to.
Yes, Fahmida. Mazhar, just, taking lessons from the South African experience with the plane landing last week, Thursday, and from what we've been discussing until now, and just to continue with this policy of ethnic cleansing in Gaza and the impact this is likely to have, I would say both globally, but also more importantly, we're talking about countries like Indonesia, countries like Malaysia, where no visas are required. I mean, could those countries be affected, or will they accept now that they've seen what has happened in South Africa?
I think the more noise you make in South Africa, the better for other potential cases. Because I was there last week. I was very impressed how quickly the various groups came together to feed the people, to look after them, to give them advice, provide them housing. I mean, that was excellent. And again, it shows that where the government failed, the local people with the local organization stepped in and stepped up to the plate and looked after these people. Now, in countries like Indonesia, at the political level is openly supportive of the Zionists. So I think, they probably will fare much worse in those countries because they are repressive and maybe they don't have the setups that you have in South Africa, and the Zionists will get away with this. The Zionists will get away with committing this ethnic cleansing. So I think it's very important that people in South Africa make more noise, make this a bigger issue than it already is. And I said to you guys when I was there last week, you are in a position, because people do look up to you, that you can project the call with the correct message and the correct solution from South Africa that could carry weight, which people in the West can't do. So I think this opportunity you should use to step up to the plate and warn other people and, tell these countries where they don't need visas for the Palestinians, this is going to happen, and make connections with people on that side and be prepared for planes that may or may not arrive there. So, and recreate the narrative to say that this is ethnic cleansing supported by the Zionist state and we're not having anything to do with it.
Yes. Khalid, to what extent, from what Mazhar is saying, to what extent have we seized this opportunity? And the reason why I am asking this question is we know that there are all sorts of theories that are making the rounds. And I think from the first time when those that had landed last week and they're talking about those that had infiltrated Palestine, there may be infiltrators and one needs to be wary of them. These are all theories that are still doing the rounds, which to an extent, creates a level of suspicion, a level of skepticism. And I'm sure you have been able to address it as well, Khalid.
Absolutely. And I think these need to be strongly debunked as soon as somebody hears about them, because number one, what these narratives do is they paint the Palestinians in a very suspicious light, which is something that people in some circles actually want in order to feed into the xenophobia threat within South Africa. So we need to make this unequivocally clear. The Palestinians that have arrived in South Africa, even from the first flight, people were notified about their arrival through extended relatives in other countries. So Palestinians locally actually went looking for them. Lawyers for human rights were alerted to the fact that there are Palestinians here, and then they went individually to every family to try and locate them all over Johannesburg, painstakingly, alongside the Caring Women's Forum. Gift of the Givers got involved as well. They've done sterling work, all three of them, in order to understand who these people are, where they've come from, to understand their identities as well. Now, another thing we need to understand in terms of the culture of the Gazan people, because Gaza is such a closed area, and it's part of Arab heritage to know each other's lineage. People know where each other come from within Gaza. It's not a very big area. So I would know that this person I'm meeting lived next to my uncle who was in Rafah, or this family who've come were neighbors to my aunt who was living in Shujaiya, for example. They've managed to verify almost everybody in amongst these arrivals. Bear in mind that some of the Palestinians who arrived on both flights immediately transited on to other countries. They flew on elsewhere. That's the one point that needs to be debunked. The second is that the South African government and the taxpayer money is looking after the Palestinians while South Africans go hungry and while South Africans are living destitute lives. This is absolute nonsense. The Palestinians who are here are being taken care of by civil society, by organizations, and by communities. There has been not a single cent provided from taxpayer money for even a loaf of bread for any of the Palestinians. This has all been the goodwill of the people that have come forward to assist. And thirdly, for those who assert that this is only being done to help Muslims, well, Gift of the Givers track record, they've assisted people of all races, ethnicities, backgrounds, all over the world. So these are all just allegations which are trying to further a very damaging agenda, which is trying to, as Mazhar pointed out earlier, sow discord amongst the South African community, and hoping, on the one hand, after they've tried to embarrass South Africa and failed, that they can set about the wheel of xenophobia within the country. But we all, every diligent citizen in the country and everybody who's listening to this podcast needs to understand that they've got a duty to quash these rumors as soon as they surface.
Yes, Khalid, I think, you raised a number of points, and I'm sure, Fahmida, you've also obviously been following up on some of these theories that have been doing the rounds.
And I would want to add on to what Khalid has mentioned in terms of some of the issues that people have to look at closely. I think interrogation is a very important point when trying to absorb some of the information and perhaps come to a conclusion around exactly what's happening. And I just want to point out one or two things. Now, of course, Israel has been approached, authorities there have been approached around their response to some of these allegations. Now, Kogat, which is a unit of the Israeli military that deals with the administration of occupied territories specifically, has told Haaretz, and Haaretz, in fact, had investigated some of this up to this point, that the evacuation, that they call it, of these Palestinians was done in coordination with a third country, a host country. But we saw in the case of South Africa where the Border Management Authority would not let the people disembark that plane. If there was that sort of coordination, we would have seen a far smoother arrival in South Africa from this second group of people specifically. And also Israel had said that Al-Majd Europe had provided it with a list, the Israeli authorities provided it with a list of those people who had traveled on Thursday. But as Khalid mentioned earlier on, they are not able to travel easily, at the very least, through the Rafah border. They were facilitated through Israel and the Ramon airport. How is it that Israel would only learn on the Thursday when they arrived in South Africa who these people were and how they traveled? And they also assert that they had the necessary documentation as well as visas. Well, one, they don't need visas necessarily. And also, two, South Africa is known for its reception of asylum seekers. But also, had this been anything else but suspicious, why weren't their passports stamped? Israel would know very well that it would make difficult their entry into another country. And we go back to the point of embarrassing, whether it's South Africa or any other host country, in terms of what their stance, South Africa specifically, but also making it look as if, oh, well, look, Palestinians are searching for some sort of refuge and no one is willing to help them. It's the kind of comments we've seen on social media where people talk about, well, Arab countries won't receive them. Look, South Africa won't either because Palestinians are this type of person or this is what they deserve. All of this, I think it's very important to interrogate what is happening because there is a lot of orchestration around what is going on, so that it is framed in a particular way, so that a specific narrative is continued throughout the Gaza war.
Yes, shukran for that. Mazhar, I think, clearly from what you're hearing from both Khalid and Fahmida as well, many red flags and a lot of interrogation still needs to be done. And I think for me as well is, looking at those countries that are friendly with Israel. And in this case, I mean, they came through Kenya as well. We know Kenya obviously enjoys, good close ties with Israel as well. And one cannot put anything past this Zionist regime in terms of utilizing, and then Fahmida spoke about, using third parties as well. We spoke about Tom Lint as well. They will do whatever to basically get out and make themselves look, like they were not aware of what was happening, like Fahmida mentioned, on the Thursday itself. Yet we know that even if they came through the Ramon base as well, not a fly can go undetected through a military base in Israel. So this obviously is, rather than being focused inwardly and debating a lot amongst ourselves, I think these are the issues that are important for us to interrogate.
I think I can't add much more than what's already been said by Khalid and Fahmida. I'm not an aviation expert, but when a plane leaves from one airport to going to another airport, you can't just go and drive there like you can your car. You need to agree beforehand. You have to have a landing slot. You have to have an agreement with the airport that your flight is coming there. So the fact that it went from occupied Palestine to Kenya, Kenyans must have known something about it, who's doing it and what. So these are questions that need to be looked into and answered. And as has already been said, you can only leave from the Rafah border. So if you leave from any other point, it must be under the full knowledge of the Zionist occupiers on who's going out, why they're going out, and where they're going. I mean, they have a record of virtually every single Palestinian. When I speak to my Palestinian friends who are even born in the UK, they say when they go back, even their movement is restricted because they are from Palestine. But if you're a non-Palestinian with a Western passport, when you go to Palestine, you can move around freely. So they keep tabs on every single Palestinian that lived there, used to live there, and may have come back there because they don't want them to resettle there. So it doesn't take a genius to work out there has been collusion at probably every single level of Israeli infrastructure, from the state all the way down to the military and all sorts of other bodies, in facilitating this ethnic cleansing. And that needs to be said, and those questions need to be asked, and we need to push that forward just to show that this is state sanctioned ethnic cleansing, and it's a serious crime. This is not a small matter, and I think that point needs to be made very clearly.
Shukran for that, Mazhar. I see we've got about 5 minutes to go. Khalid, just some final thoughts. Starting with you, we'll go then to Fahmida and we'll ask Mazhar to end off.
Sure. Just 2 points to add on to all the information that's been shared already. Israel has a track record of when it wants to, I'm a big fan of mob movies. I don't know if anybody else is. And you know how the mob operates. They never get their hands dirty directly. There's always somebody else employed to do the dirty work. So the mob boss will give off the order to take somebody out. The job will get done, so he can never, ever be convicted. Israel creates shell companies to carry out dirty work elsewhere. Al-Majd is a shell company created by Israel. The company that was created to carry out the pager attacks in Lebanon is a shell company of Israel. They've got a litany, a record of shell companies that they create in order to carry out the dirty work, almost always linked to Israelis who have dual national citizenship in other parts of the world, which are quite difficult to trace. I'm so glad Al Jazeera's investigative team is on this alongside other media outlets as well. So that's number one. Number two, this speaks to the psychology, the psyche, the deep depravity within Israeli society. Number one, in that they're making Palestinians pay for their own displacement. Just think about that for a second. Palestinians are having to pay for their own displacement because the conditions around them are made unlivable. And what this takes me to is, if you look at the West Bank and the home demolitions that take place in the West Bank, many times we find Palestinians are forced to demolish their own homes because if they don't, they will be fined by the Israelis. They've got to demolish their own homes, or else they will be fined by the Israelis. And if they cannot afford the fine, they will be imprisoned. This is the deep depravity that exists within Israeli society. And this is the core of the problem about what we're dealing with.
Shukran for this, Khalid. Fahmida, final thoughts and where to from here? If you could unmute your mic, please, Fahmida.
I would like to add to what Khalid has also just mentioned in terms of some of the strategy that's used all around this. We've spoken to one Palestinian man who had arrived last Thursday, and in terms of the final hours of the journey, also spoke about the psychological exhaustion. And I think this is where we go back to in terms of people saying, whether we question whether or not people had a choice. When there are no medical services, when there is no schooling, when there is no safety. And this is what people reiterated over and over again, seeking safety because of 2 years, and they simply can't take any more. Is there a choice when there is actually no option? And something so impossible like having to pay for that, when ultimately there is potentially an agenda of ridding the territory of its people anyway. But where to from here? I think it's important for these investigations to continue. And what, as we've seen in the last year or two, is how accountability is vital in terms of turning the tide on some of the things that we're seeing. It shouldn't be acceptable that this sort of thing should continue to happen with no questions being asked, no one being held accountable and responsible for what is happening. Because if those responsible are allowed to do so without questioning, anything is possible. And we won't see the end of this. We won't see accountability, and we won't see things changing.
Absolutely important, critical point that you mentioned right at the end there, Fahmida. Mazhar, I'll let you have the final word.
I think your two esteemed guests have put everything into a perspective and spoken very well. And just to echo what Khalid said just now, I think it's very important that we're not dealing with a normal state here, and we're not dealing with normal people here. These are sick, depraved, and evil people. The length they will go to achieve their objectives, I don't think any other nation in the world have done this. And if we go back to history, even at the time of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, we can see the kinds of plots and plannings they did. We know the background to the whole Ahzab incident when they gathered around Medina. So this is not a normal state. They are sick, they are depraved, they are evil, and the world needs to recognize that, and they need to recognize that because a state like that cannot exist. It has no moral purpose for existing, and it should never exist. And this state, there is no solution other than abolishing this Zionist apartheid nightmare that has been inflicted on the Palestinian people.
Well, shukran for that. Jazakallah khairan so much to you, Mazhar Khan, Khalid, Vawda, and also to Fahmida Mullah. An absolute pleasure having all three of you as part of the panel discussion this evening right here on Salam Media. We wish you all the best, and we certainly will continue following developments. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Well, that brings us to the end of unpacking the refugee crisis in South Africa, the Palestinian refugee crisis. And once again, I think a lot of ground has been covered, a lot has been unpacked, a lot has been brought to the attention of our listeners, our viewers, many questions. And there will still be many a question that will be asked. There are still many unanswered questions. But I think Fahmida summed it up very well right at the end as well in terms of accountability, and this is where we shouldn't be stopped. We should be holding those accountable for what we are witnessing and what has been playing out. And with that, I'm going to take leave of you. It's been an absolute pleasure being in your company once again. So from myself and the team here at Salam Media, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.